Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending another GoDaddy Pro webinar, or if this is your first one, welcome. We're glad to have you. We've got Geoff Jewell and Ben Rubin back with us again this week to talk about VPS, this time Plesk Obsidian, but I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about that when I introduce them here in a few minutes. We're going to have them do a presentation, but while they're doing that, you can feel free to go ahead and ask questions. Just drop them in the Ask a Question tab there at the bottom of the screen, and they'll get to them, you know, as it's pertinent to the content or at the end, whichever ends up working better. You can also feel free to talk with each other, with us in the chat, and just interact as much as you want to. And then in a few days, once this webinar is over, we're going to reach out with an email giving you a recap of the webinar and also an on-demand recording so you can view that on your own time as you need to. Since I didn't introduce myself yet, I'm Angela Blake from GoDaddy Pro. I'm going to be in the chat as well, but I'll be showing up as the GoDaddy icon. So if you see GoDaddy in there, it's not a weird bot, it's just me. So say hi if I talk, it's fine. I'm a real person. And then Chorba, you'll also see him in the chat. He's usually my co-pilot for these, but since he can't be on screen right now, just give him a shout out in chat. He'll be helping with some links. He runs our GoDaddy Pro Twitter handle, if I can even talk today. And that's where we post news about our GoDaddy Pro events and other like information that you might want or need as far as that goes. So follow the Twitter handle. He's the one who's behind that, and you'll get to interact with him a little bit more for that. So before we get the actual presentation started, let's do our shameless plug, kind of a tradition now. Share a website with us so we can see who we've got here today. Hi, Chorba. While you guys are working on that, I'm going to go ahead with the introductions here. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell everybody a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Yep. My name is Ben Rubin. I've been with GoDaddy just coming up on 3 years, I believe. Started in our hosting department, taking inbound telephone calls, supporting our customers. Worked through leadership for a little while, and then about 3.5 months ago, I took a permanent position with our channel management team. We bridge between our corporate and our product partners and our care centers, helping with their training, their product knowledge, their overall GoDaddy experience with the product teams.
Awesome. Geoff, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about yourself for a little bit and then go ahead and take it away with the presentation.
My favorite subject, talking about myself. So I am Geoffrey Jewell. I am also a channel manager at GoDaddy. I've been with the company for a little under 10 years or 11 years. It'll be 11 years in August. Spent most of that time within our care teams as a leader, as a supervisor leadership for both the regular inbound teams as well as the hosting support teams, where I spent a good chunk of my time. So now I'm doing channel management, and I focus mainly on our advanced hosting products. So that would be VPS dedicated and our business hosting and reseller hosting products. And speaking of VPS, we're going to be talking a little bit today about VPS 4, specifically VPS 4, which is GoDaddy's latest platform utilizing Plesk Obsidian. For those of you who got to join our last session where we talked about WHM and cPanel, this will be very similar in terms of the kind of focus. We're going to show you a little bit of what to expect when you're utilizing Plesk Obsidian, but we also want to focus also on showing you that Plesk isn't quite as scary as I think might have a reputation for being. So I grew up at GoDaddy. I learned all of my hosting tech at GoDaddy. And a lot of our care guides at GoDaddy tend to have not the best impression of Plesk. And there's a lot of factors for that. But when it comes to utilizing Plesk, it's actually an incredibly robust and powerful web hosting platform. We want to show you some of the best features that might entice you to give Plesk a try if you're looking at going with a VPS or a dedicated server in the future. So when it comes to, Ben, if you could go to the next slide, when it comes to Plesk versus cPanel, it's very similar to if you prefer Pepsi or Coke. And we'll show you some of the reasons why, but just out of curiosity, just because I'm a curious individual, do you prefer Pepsi or Coke? Throw it in the chat here, just to kind of get an idea if we're dealing with Pepsi or Coke people. But that also kind of alludes to what the differences are between cPanel and Plesk. There are some pretty significant differences, but at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to personal preference, which is exactly the same experience that you would have with Pepsi or Coke, right? There's, some people might put on a blind taste test and not know the difference. Some people know exactly what they're getting and don't really like the other brand or flavor of the other brand. So, and we'll talk more about that when we get further into the presentation, but we'll talk about why would you choose Plesk Obsidian. We'll show you some slides that kind of go over setting up the server for the first time, as well as adding your first website with Plesk. And then we'll show you navigating the Plesk dashboard, give you a breakdown of kind of what to expect the first time you get into Plesk, as well as how to find some of the most commonly used items within the Plesk dashboard. And then we're going to show you two of the things I think call out the biggest differences between Plesk and cPanel, specifically the Plesk extensions menu that you have, as well as the WordPress toolkit, which if you're WordPress users and you're looking at a VPS, this might be the aspect that steers you into trying out Plesk rather than going with something like WHM and cPanel. So what is Plesk Obsidian? Plesk is by itself is a commercial web hosting platform with a control panel that allows server administrator to set up new websites, reseller accounts, mail accounts, and DNS through a web-based interface. And if that doesn't sound original, that's because I didn't write that. I pulled that directly from Plesk's informational page on their site. So that's a pretty easy breakdown of what Plesk is, right? It's not that dissimilar from cPanel for those of you who have used it. Obsidian is the latest from Plesk. So the biggest differences there is an improved interface, new security monitoring, website optimizations. It's not unlike any tech that you use day to day where the operating system improves and there's new quality of life and UI improvements, right? Plesk is not going to be dramatically different from Obsidian to some of the other versions that you've seen with Plesk or maybe utilizing Plesk, but tiny changes that make the experience better overall. And we'll show you some of the big changes that you might see if you're using Plesk Obsidian, if that's your first, I should say, Plesk experience. So yeah, let me stop there and see if there's any questions before we go on to the next slide. Or see if there's anything that Ben wants to add to this.
Yeah, so I don't see anything in chat just yet as far as questions are concerned. But I think this is probably not a bad time to do a little compare and contrast. So sticking within the Plesk world, some of you may have experience working with Plesk in a shared environment, whether it's our shared environment or any of the other hosting providers out there. Most of the time, those hosting providers are like us, using Plesk exclusively on a Windows operating system. But in this case, when we're talking VPS and DED, Plesk is able to be used on both Linux and Windows, which is pretty cool. The other big, difference from Plesk on a shared environment versus Plesk when you're managing it yourself on your VPS is just overall control, right? So as we talk through these control panels and we're talking about VPS, we're talking about like putting control back in the hands of you, the server admin, or you, the dev, or you, the website administrator. When you're interacting with a shared hosting, your hosting provider has locked that thing down. They made a lot of determination, a lot of decisions based on commonalities and what they think is a safe threshold for things. So they've also taken features away from you in a shared environment. When we're talking about Plesk throughout the course of this particular webinar, we want to make sure that we understand Plesk, the way that Plesk made it and bore it, is exactly what we install and provision for you guys. So Plesk Web Host Edition is exactly what is available for y'all.
And to piggyback off that a little bit, for those of you who are customers of GoDaddy who may or may not have had experience calling in and talking to some of our guides, the scenario that Ben just described, growing up at GoDaddy has very much been a cPanel world. So when it comes to those shared hosting environments, our guides are very well versed in cPanel. Plesk is not something that they are incredibly well versed with, just because on the shared hosting environment using only Windows, it does have a lower user base than the cPanel environment does. And part of that's because that's what we tend to recommend at GoDaddy for the best customer experience. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that that it's always going to be the best experience to go with for every customer. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on Plesk, is to kind of emphasize that it's not quite as scary as you might have heard that it is, or if you've had experience using GoDaddy's shared hosting platform before and utilizing Plesk there, maybe it wasn't your speed. This might be a good eye-opener to show you that if you were to run Plesk Obsidian on your server versus running what we offer on a shared environment, it's going to be a night and day difference for you from a user standpoint, from a usability standpoint, from a accessibility standpoint.
For sure. So obviously, first thing to cover is why choose Plesk, or why choose any control panel at all. So without a control panel, managing your server is going to look a lot like what we see in our screenshot on the left. This is Windows PowerShell. This is, for those that you remember DOS or remember command line, this is the version of those that you need to use in order to interact with your Windows server when you don't have a control panel. Yes, there's IIS Manager, and yes, there are things like Windows Server Configuration Center, but the depth of the configuration items in there and the questions that it asks you are not meant for a novice. Like, there's very clearly a reason that there are Microsoft certified professionals who are geared towards managing equipment or managing servers in that way. What Plesk does is it takes away the nitty gritty, the hard stuff, the pesky coding, the having to remember commands that exist only in PowerShell and nowhere else, and gives you, a graphical user interface, right? A GUI, click, drag, drop, fill in a blank, things like that, and really simplifies the experience from, again, the dev, the website administrator.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So when we're talking about Plesk versus cPanel, because the previous slide, we actually didn't change initially. We didn't actually utilize a different screen. We actually kept the same one as the last presentation where we talked about cPanel, because the why choose Plesk versus why choose cPanel, the answer is largely the same, right? Simplifying the experience, giving you control in a graphical user interface versus command line. That doesn't really change from platform to platform, hence the Pepsi versus Coke, right? There's still soda, there's still relatively the same experience, or for you energy drink lovers, it's still Red Bull versus Monster, right? But there are some key differences between Plesk and cPanel that we wanted to call out, and we wanted to use this page as a way to kind of emphasize that. So the first one that you would call out would be Plesk is all in one. When you go with cPanel, you're technically getting cPanel and WHM. And while that experience is perfectly fine and I think very, very reasonable to use, it does tend to kind of split the experiences of managing the server and managing individual websites on that server into two different systems. WHM meaning where you create different cPanel accounts and manage a lot of the server functions, and a lot of the more technical aspects, where cPanel is where you manage the individual sites, you upload your files and content. That tends to be the end user experience. So when you're on GoDaddy shared hosting, we're basically giving you a cPanel account that is a part of a larger WHM system on a virtually private server. Whereas with Plesk, everything is kind of in one location. There's nothing above Plesk like there is with cPanel that forces you to go to a different system to manage sites and versus managing the server. Everything's just kind of in one simplified system. The next one to call out would be, if you're using Windows OS, Plesk is kind of your best bet, if not your only bet in certain situations. There are certainly other control panel solutions out there for Windows servers that you can use when it comes to GoDaddy. If you're using Windows, you're basically either going to be utilizing a control panel free environment, or you're going with Plesk. And that's why we say that if you are wanting a control panel, it's probably best to go with the thing with Plesk versus going with something that is maybe unknown. The other cool thing about Plesk, as Ben kind of alluded to earlier, it is available on Linux servers, which is not something that is the same for cPanel. You can't get cPanel on a Windows server. So if you want to use Plesk, regardless of your operating system, you can. WordPress Toolkit is another fantastic function. So WordPress makes up something, I'm gonna create a statistic right now, but it's something like 40 to 50% of the world's websites are built on a WordPress backend, which means if you are building sites for a living or managing sites for a living, you're probably using WordPress. And Plesk offers what might be the most comprehensive WordPress toolkit of any platform on the market right now. It is literally designed with a WordPress focus, even down to its kind of bare site functionality, which we will show you in a few later slides. And then the last thing is going to be databases. So databases are complicated, and managing them can also become complicated. But MS SQL is a type of database that isn't available on Linux platforms or cPanel platforms. So when you're utilizing MS SQL databases or MS SQL databases, you're going to want to have Plesk on a Windows server to be able to manage that. And Plesk gives you that ability with the ability to install SQL Server directly into your Plesk interface. 75 million WordPress sites in the wild, according to Churba's statistic. I'll credit that statistic better than the random one that I just gave. Ben, anything you want to add on any of the four pieces we just talked about?
So yeah, I think probably a little something on each of them. So Plesk is all in one. When I log into any account, I don't want to log into additional accounts to manage them individually. I like one-stop shop. I want high-level overview, and I want to be able to manage each of them from a single dashboard. I think, I suppose this is more personal opinion, I think Plesk won at presenting the very first page that I see when I log into my Plesk control panel with the information that's important to me and relevant to me. So I think Plesk gets a check in the win column there. For working with the Windows operating system, probably not much else to add there. It's just the alternatives for working on a Windows OS when it comes to a control panel. We're talking in the maybe 5 digits of adoption. We're talking like tens of thousands of users instead of millions of users. So you can consider the kind of experience that you're going to get there. And that isn't to disparage other solutions, but when this is your business, you likely want to go with the best, and you want to go with those that have been able to put a focus and have the resources to kind of improve on things. WordPress Toolkit, I won't add anything else here. We cover it in a later slide. It is arguably one of my top 3 favorite features of Plesk overall. And then a little bit about database management. So with Plesk, the cool thing about it is it looks at things as kind of like extensible, but it's also fully aware that everything you manage may not be right in front of you, and it may not live on that server. So when you're setting up your database management, one of the questions it does ask you is, are you using an external database server? And that's not something that every user will take advantage of. But for those of us that have clients that might be hosted elsewhere, maybe they're at Azure, maybe they're at AWS, maybe they run their own local database out of their office that we need to connect to. Plesk gives us the ability to connect to those in order to manage them and also utilize the information that's stored in those, which is pretty cool. So setting up the server, provisioning process is pretty similar across a lot of GoDaddy accounts. Very first question after I hit setup is going to be, what are you calling it and where do you want it to be? Our VPS products have availability in our Singapore data center, one of our data centers in the EU, and then Eastern United States. After that's done, we're talking up to about 8-10 minutes for it to provision that. We move on to the next step, and that's going to be creating your very first website or your very first subscription in Plesk. Plesk walks you through it as a step-by-step. As I log in, it asks me, what domain do I want to add? The other cool thing about this process is if your DNS is managed by a provider that supports the Domain Connect protocol, Plesk can actually update and manage your DNS for you. Now, I don't have it documented here in the screenshot on the screen because there's a lot of moving parts to it. But if it does that check and it sees that that domain can be managed from a DNS perspective by Plesk, it asks you, say yes, and cool. It goes ahead and automates the DNS switches for you. And then adding SSL and TLS certificates. Cool thing about Plesk, and we talked about extensions earlier, and we'll talk about it again in a later slide. We have Let's Encrypt. Well, Plesk has Let's Encrypt extensibility. So there's a plugin built for Plesk that is available to me right on the left-hand panel of a Plesk control panel. And going through that process allows me to issue an SSL against any website, or I'm sorry, any domain or subdomain that's hosted on the server, as long as my DNS resolves. So the coolest thing about that is it automates not only the issuance and installation of it, but it'll also automate the renewals of it. And you're left to just manage your content and your redirects.
Cool. So navigating Plesk is, I think the emphasis I want to put on this is very simple. So not unlike cPanel, when you get to the Plesk landing page, you're going to see some content in the middle. In the case of Plesk, you're going to actually see your different sites that you have available, whereas cPanel has a bunch of their icons or functionality. So cPanel looks a little bit more like what you're used to seeing on a desktop computer or even on your phone, right? There's going to be links to different applications that you'll have. And one of those functions being accessing your actual cPanel accounts on your websites. Whereas Plesk is a little bit different. Again, everything being kind of all combined into one space. When you get to the Plesk landing page, you're going to see all of the functions to manage your sites right underneath them. So you actually see them broken out into cards right on the Plesk landing page. In this case, we have a temporary domain name, plesk.facesitetv.net. And then below that are some different options for managing that specific domain name and the website associated with that domain name, all right there. You can collapse the menu, so it's easy to see all of your sites listed right there. But then on the left-hand side is also like cPanel, a navigation where you can see some of the more common and widely used functions like website management, mail, files, databases, extensions, and pretty much everything else you would need. If you can't find it on that left-hand menu, or you're not familiar with where it would exist within the left-hand menu, there's also a handy search bar at the top of the screen that you'll be able to click and much like cPanel has, type in what you're looking for and it'll bring up pretty much what you need. So if you're looking for setting up a new database server, you simply go up to the top, type in database, it'll show you the most common options. Click the one that you need, it takes you right to it. So I would say that when it comes to comparing and contrasting cPanel and Plesk, and I don't want to make this entire presentation about that because Plesk is totally unique on its own in a lot of ways. When it comes to that singular feature, having a left-hand navigation and an easy-to-use search function, they're going to be pretty comparable. So, if you're intimidated by Plesk or you have been intimidated by Plesk in the past, you'll be able to find what you need relatively quickly as long as you know what you're looking for. Anything to call out here that I did not there on that one, Ben?
Nope. I think clean, easy to use, and at a glance, I think are probably three adjectives.
Not quite minimalist, but clean. I like clean. Yeah, that's definitely a good way I would describe that.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've already emphasized at a couple of different slides is Plesk is all under one roof. So rather than having to jump back between WHM and cPanel like you would on a cPanel account that you have with a VPS, pretty much everything is under one roof on Plesk. So if you're looking for the management site tools, if you're looking for the server management tools, all you got to do is go to the menu and search for it, and you'll be able to find it. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about some of those different tools as we get into the later slides.
And then we'll see here on this next slide. So it's website management kind of at the forefront. So that's what I'm presented with first. It's not what are these rogue variables or features of the server that I want to manage. It asks me about my websites. It's why I'm here, and that's why I have this server, is to host my clients' content. So doing things like managing our PHP and ASP settings, getting statistics, setting up FTP users, or managing our IIS application pool, email settings, or anything like that. All of that's available here in this very clean and very easy to use card. One of the other things that I think is important to highlight is while we talk about Plesk having everything under one roof and presenting everything to us on a single page, I think it's important to note that I can still set up client by client access to manage the subscriptions that are pertinent to them. So I get to see everything on one dashboard, but if I have 15 clients, I can have 15 usernames for my Plesk so they can log in and manage their content uniquely. Then we talked about this a little bit earlier. So we talked about our database management. So on the right-hand side of the screenshot, we'll see that we have our database servers. So that's where I can go ahead and select external or alternative database servers, or maybe I run a fleet of VPSs, as I know some of our pros do. Maybe I want to utilize One of them strictly as a database server and another one as a content server, something more of like a little bit more of a boutique setup like that. I can absolutely do that with Plesk. Another cool thing about Plesk is when we were working with the Windows operating system, Plesk allows me to manage my MySQL, my MariaDB. I can also manage my SQL Server databases. So uniquely, one of the very few server control panels out there that has any sort of management tooling for SQL Server.
Sorry, that was the doorbell.
Does someone need to get it?
That was the Alexa doorbell. Sorry.
And then, so on this slide, so we say Plesk is multilingual. So it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. We don't necessarily mean in the traditional sense, but what we do mean is support for various functionality, up to and including our programming languages. So one of cPanel's greatest claims to fame is their Easy Apache, which allows us to single dashboard manage our PHP modules, PHP settings, our Perl packages, and keep everything up to date from a security aspect. Plesk is no wimp in that category as well. We see on the right-hand side a very verbose list of a lot of different features and manageable both programming languages as well as server types. So if anybody on the call is particular to SQL Server, Plesk automates the install of SQL Server Express, which is just done through 3 clicks. We check that box, turn it to a green check mark, hit go, say, yeah, I'm okay if everything hits the fan, and let her rip.
So services and processes, again, similar to cPanel, there are going to be times when you are WHM in this case, or it might be times when you have to stop an individual process on your server or other services like DNS, MS SQL, MySQL, et cetera, so forth. As they misbehave, you'll have to go through and troubleshoot them. Not a whole lot different other than visual aesthetics, but the ability to start, stop, and restart different services on your server is also a functionality of Plesk, just as it is on cPanel. So really, this is far more one of the Pepsi versus Coke examples, right? WHMs are big icons where you can see the individual services there. Plesk lists everything in kind of a list format with the buttons to start, stop, and continue, or start, stop, and restart them over to the right. I think you can also manage different settings for how they start automatically right there in the middle column. So the same amount of control, with respect to the smaller minor differences here or there, exists on both cPanel and Plesk.
Yeah, I mean, just like our computers, things crash or applications freeze. And the cool thing about being on a VPS is I can just restart the particular service that's stuck. Whereas on a shared hosting, that's not traditionally a service I have available or a feature I have available. I have to call in, work with my hosting provider, and discuss through my options that way. It's also a lot less interruptive or aggressive, right? So restarting the whole entire server is going to take down all of your clients. It's going to take down all of your servers. One by one, being able to do it for the impacted service is a much more graceful way to do it. And then a couple things that are only on Plesk. I will talk a little bit about the Plesk extensions. So the cool thing about this is, and we use the analogy on the left-hand side, we kind of look at it as like an app store. So part of Plesk's default functionality is displaying to you, the end user, a list of extensible features that are developed both by them as well as third parties. So Plesk focuses on what Plesk knows that they're best at. They manage and create a first-in-class control panel. But maybe somebody wants to do a better reporting tool, or somebody wants to build, I mentioned earlier, Let's Encrypt. So Plesk has no business developing a tool to issue out SSLs. They're not the issuer. So Let's Encrypt built the plugin for this. Or I mentioned reporting. So Grafana, if I want to be able to manage visually my uptime or service monitoring or hits or this, that, the other, Grafana is a great tool for that. It also allows you to install additional programming languages that don't exist on the server out of the box. So we talk about Node.js. We talk about our React frameworks for building interactive online applications and stuff. All of that can be done here.
Yep, and the interface looks alarmingly like an app store that you would see on your mobile device or even on your computer now that they have that. So when it comes to the different options that you have available, there's a ton. There's a handy search function that allows you to look for exactly what you're trying to add to the server. Some of them do have a cost involved, and we're not here to call out or endorse any of these extensions, right? Because there would be a third party. You have a third party at that point. But essentially, there's a lot of functionality that you can add to your Plesk server using this app store, similar to the way you could add functionality to your smart device or your PC at home. And then something we've talked about quite a bit already, or at least we've hinted at quite a bit, is the WordPress toolkit. So Plesk offers arguably the most comprehensive suite of WordPress tools inside of a control panel system available to anybody on any market. With the WordPress toolkit, it's already pre-installed within Plesk when you load it, Plesk Obsidian. You can do things like one-click WordPress installs, manage plugins and themes, mass manage multiple WordPress sites, manage remote WordPress sites from other hosting companies. That's in beta right now, so that might not be available or even permanent. You can also do things like stage, clone, sync, update, migrate. We talk about this being the most comprehensive suite. Anybody who is a GoDaddy Pro member might already experience a lot of the functionality you see here within the GoDaddy Pro program. We do offer a lot of the types of functions for WordPress in that same system. But if you're somebody who, for all intents and purposes, is trying to create a more simplified experience, or maybe doesn't want to jump between managing your Plesk, your actual server itself through Plesk, and then also managing WordPress sites, Plesk makes that a far simplified experience by putting it all under one roof. You can literally click the button on the left-hand navigation and start managing your sites right from there. Super simple, tons of great features, especially if you're somebody who is a WordPress fanatic, or maybe just a statistic of one of the 75 million WordPress websites in the world. So, or in the wild, I should say. The world is wild, so I guess that makes sense. Ben, anything else you want to call out here? I think we should emphasize or highlight here.
I think the biggest thing is the ability to take action across multiple sites or all of the sites on there. So instead of having to manage individual sites on a case-by-case basis, managing my core update, managing the update of my favorite plugins that I install across them, manage them across the board. When this list is fully populated, I could one-click update all, and it does safe updates as well. It does my updates one by one, and it also does backups before it does it as well. One of the other things it does is we see that install button in the top left corner. That's going to give us features like installing both a fresh copy of WordPress, but it also gives me the ability to install a plugin or a theme across a whole variety of sites. So if I have 35 sites and I want to install a new Google Analytics plugin that I have been turned on to, I click the button, check them all, upload the plugin, and click go, and it rips off across the whole entire fleet of sites. So it's pretty darn clever.
One other thing I'd like to go back a couple slides actually to the website management screen. Something else to call out that's really cool about Plesk is that when you are actually one more slide, I think. So nope, you had it right there. So go back forward. There we go. So when you're looking at the individual sites, if you have WordPress installed on the site, you can actually see some of the functionality of that WordPress toolkit right there from the website card. So doing things like plugin and theme updates right from the screen. So you don't even have to necessarily go into the WordPress toolkit to be able to manage some of those WordPress updates that we talked about. So Plesk is doing a lot of work and a lot of heavy lifting to make managing WordPress built sites as seamless an experience as possible. And this might be the biggest selling point of why you might want to choose Plesk over cPanel if you were looking at going with a VPS in the future. And
Q's and A's.
Yes. Questions that you have, we will do our best to answer. One of the benefits of using cPanel WHM is a very active community and of resources and users. Is there a similar community built up around Plesk Obsidian? Yes, there is. So something we didn't necessarily call out here is that, and I don't know if this is terribly relevant, but Plesk and cPanel are actually owned by one larger company. They both are, competing against each other kind of in the same space, but all kind of goes to the same people at the end of the day. And yes, Plesk has a larger community, although I would argue, I don't know the install base of Plesk over cPanel, but Ben, I don't know if you're able to speak to that. But yes, there is a community around Plesk. I'm not sure how it compares to the cPanel offering, the community for cPanel, but there is a ton of content available for Plesk. Similar to cPanel, they have their own YouTube page. They've got an entire site full of different content available for people looking to learn Plesk or looking to get their way around a specific task or ask within Plesk.
Not a great deal else to add there. Their forums are super, super, super active. They have help built into every single page, or help blades built into every single page when you're inside of the control panel. And it's also incredibly well documented, not just by them, but also by user experiences and other providers, or even other CMS providers. So many CMS providers will actually develop documentation specific to living within a Plesk environment. Only other thing I guess I would add to that, we didn't really touch on it much earlier, but when we look at some of our colleagues in the hosting marketplace, we look at companies like Media Temple, and we look at what their control panel of choice is. Plesk is the first one that they offer out of the gates. They have decided, as a company who is a leader with the VPS or the more high-end hosting world, when a control panel is offered, it's Plesk first, cPanel if it's only what you know. I think it speaks to some of the street cred that Plesk might have.
Hey guys, sorry I was late rejoining you. My camera didn't want to come back on for a second.
That's fine. I can read the questions if you want. If you want to take a break, I know you work hard.
Are you accusing me of slacking?
No, I'm accusing you of crowdcasting. Slack is a different platform.
Come on, Geoff. You know how much I like my attention. I'll read the next one. Is there an option to change from Plesk to WHM or vice versa on a VPS? Would you have to re-provision for that?
Easy answer is no. So when you buy Plesk or you buy cPanel, you're paying a license for that specific product. So we offer cPanel and Plesk. These are paid products. So when you're buying them from GoDaddy or really any other company, you're paying a license to use them. And so when you're paying that license, the license is a specific price and cost for each platform. And so switching seamlessly between those two is not non-existent, right? So if you went with Plesk and it wasn't your flavor, it wasn't something that you wanted to do, and you wanted to go back to WHM or vice versa, then you would need to repurchase the entire server from scratch in this case. There isn't even an option to re-provision the server and keep the product in your account. You would have to start over from scratch. Not having a ton of experience outside of GoDaddy with purchasing servers, I would imagine that experience is the same with almost any other provider out there.
The licensing is the biggest driver behind that. The technical limitations, right? So they both set up your server very differently, but that wouldn't be an issue. I'd be able to solve that with a single re-provision. But the biggest thing is going to be those licensing fees and those licensing agreements.
Yeah, this also might be a good time to call out the fact that we currently have a discount running on the VPS system. So it's pretty low risk if you wanted to try it out. It's pretty low risk to do that right now. You can see a button down there at the bottom of the screen for 33% off of the VPS. So check that out if you're interested. And then, you're not risking as much just trying it then. Were you wanting to say more about that, Ben? More about the switching?
No. I guess the only thing on the 33%, right? So we do sticky discounts. So your renewal discount is the same; it carries through. So when we come up on renewal in 12 months, 36 months, whatever that term is, that discount follows you through, which is pretty wild. I think it helps make sure that you find a platform that works for you and you get to stick with that platform. You get to appreciate that on through.
I think the term sticky discount is vastly superior to whatever it is we use internally.
Yeah.
And now that it's out in the wild, hopefully it catches on.
It's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So another question, this one from Rubel. What if you code your site from scratch? Would it what's the benefit for using Plesk? I think because we were talking a bunch about how it's compatible with WordPress, but what about hand coding?
I'll let Ben talk most about this because I think he can speak to it best. But I think the simple answer to this is not really. I don't think there's a huge advantage one way or the other. This really comes back to what's your personal preference, right? Do you like cPanel or Plesk better? Because the same, for the most part, suite of tools will be available in both if you're not using WordPress. So whether your site's HTML or you're coding it, in PHP or ASP by hand, which is insane to me, but I know people probably do it. You're really not going to have that different of experience, with the exception of ASP only being on Plesk.
So to Jeff's point, ASP and those Microsoft proprietary languages existing only in Visual Studio. So I'm still coding everything by hand, but I have to be on a Windows VPS then in order to work with that. And then my control panel is going to be Plesk. But for other content, if I'm creating PHP websites that would run anywhere, if I'm creating JavaScript websites or Bootstrap websites that would run anywhere, it's really a matter of what do I like as far as managing the content, not about creating the content. So what is going to be easiest for me? So I finished my project, I launched it to my client, we signed off, now I'm in maintenance mode. What's going to make that side of the business easier for me? And I think it's a big determination on what features are most important. Is it the ability to manage my subscriptions very easily, automate my backups, work with a more simplified, more refined single dashboard kind of experience? Or if the alternative is going to be cPanel in this conversation, is it more a matter of managing the core functions of the server, the configurations of the server that are more important, which is where WHM comes out ahead?
Or which databases you want to have available to you for that.
Or which databases.
Which I actually have a question about. But before I get to that, I'd like to ask you all to take a look at the bottom of your screen in the polls tab. I have a quick question there for you about how satisfied you are with the webinar. I use these stats to gauge which topics you want to hear about and which speakers you enjoyed. So if you want to take a second to give us a little bit of feedback there, it's super helpful. But about the databases. So my experience with databases is mainly in querying them and not in constructing them. So I had a question about when you were talking about being able to use MS SQL or MariaDB or just MySQL. Is that dependent on which operating system you use? Do you only get MS SQL if you use Windows? Since you can also use Plesk on Linux environment, that matters, right?
That is correct. And that is very much a Microsoft decision. We know how things work within the Microsoft environment, right? It's as close to proprietary as you can get, which is good, right? So it allows them to always make sure that they have a top performing product. And SQL Server just runs the best on their operating system. There are not one shots, but there are efforts to create that same kind of functionality in the Linux environment. It's scary. It's dark. It's dangerous. Bring a friend. It's not yet.
I have a love-hate relationship with MS SQL. Yeah, that was my question on that. We've talked about, I think we've gotten through all of the questions. We talked about the discount we have available and the satisfaction poll that I wanted you guys to take for my benefit. But this is actually the end of the VPS series. So if anybody has a last minute question or if you guys have anything else to share, this is your chance. I think we're experiencing silence. Blessed silence. Thanks, Carrie. I think it's been great too. Having these guys around has been really awesome. So I'd love to have you guys back on for another webinar another time. Next week, we're actually going to be starting a new series. So it's going to be more in line with starting your web design business. If you're just getting started with that or you're thinking about starting a web design business, tune in for those webinars because we have some great information to share with you from experts in that field. Thanks, everyone.